This is Tom Fox. I'd like to welcome you to an exciting new podcast from Comply, Into the Chair, Tales from Chief Compliance Officers, which details the journey to and in the role of Chief Compliance Officers. We'll look at questions such as how does one come to sit in the chair? What are the skills needed to become a successful CCO? And what are some of the top challenges? Into the Chair, Tales from Chief Compliance Officers is a Comply podcast hosted by Tom Fox and produced by the Compliance Podcast Network. Now a word about Comply. As a global market leader in regulatory compliance solutions, Comply combines the power of regulatory compliance, services, and education to empower Chief Compliance Officers and compliance professionals to easily navigate the regulatory landscape. Comply enables firms to scale their growth while remaining vigilant in their compliance efforts by providing solutions designed to manage the burden of complex compliance tasks. The deep bench of industry experience, which includes expansive knowledge in technology enablement and regulatory compliance protocols and the processes from the Comply product portfolio offerings, including Comply Sci, RIA in a Box, and NRS, supports more than 7,000 clients, including private equity firms, hedge funds, broker-dealers, and registered investment advisors. Comply continually supports clients in their work to proactively address core compliance challenges, minimizing risk, addressing critical priorities, and meeting new demands as the industry evolves and your firm scales. In this inaugural episode, we visit with Maria Davanzo. I know you'll enjoy this episode. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and welcome to this episode with Maria Davanzo. Maria, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Tom. It's great to be back.
Maria, everyone has a unique journey in compliance, and yours is as unique as anyone's. So I was wondering if you could tell us about your career pre-compliance and how that really led to you sitting in the CO chair.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. It was, as you say, it was a unique road to get there. I started as a young lawyer. I thought I wanted to be a litigator, and I actually practiced as a young lawyer and was a litigator for several years out of law school. I was at a boutique firm in Westchester, New York, and I represented IBM and did trials and depositions and motions and all that great stuff. And then when we defeated the IBM litigation, I moved on and I opened my own law practice for lifestyle, personal reasons. And I had a real estate practice and a trust and estate practice for about 10 years. And I focused mainly on real estate transactions. And so when the financial world fell apart, I had to find something else to do. So I reinvented myself again. And I was chatting with some friends of mine, and I found myself interviewing with the general counsel at a real estate fund. That fund is Starwood Capital. They're the investment manager there. And they were a registered investment advisor. And I was talking with him. I was hoping to get a job in the legal department, frankly. And he said, I need a compliance officer. And I said, I don't know anything about compliance. So how am I going to do that? And he said, you could learn it. We'll send you to some conferences, and you're smart. You'll pick it up. And your background is in real estate, and we buy real estate. So not a problem. I said, okay. So I took the job, and he did. He was true to his word. He sent me to all the conferences, and I learned how to be a chief compliance officer for a registered investment advisor. And that's how I started my compliance career.
Maria, one of the reasons I enjoy visiting with you is our professional backgrounds are similar in lots of ways, starting as trial lawyers and learning, I guess, what is the old school way under a partner. And I'd like to really ask you, how did you professionally develop as a young lawyer, and how did those skills that we had to learn, or the ways that we were taught as a second chair, as a briefing clerk, as someone who would prepare a partner or a more senior lawyer for a deposition, how did those skills really help you when you got up into the corporate world and even into the CCO chair?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So to go back for a minute to what you started with, yes, I learned the same way that you did, really old school. So I remember as a young associate, first couple months I was there, the partner, and I may have shared this with you before, but the partner took me into the conference room, me and a couple other young lawyers, and he had a complaint. We were defense lawyers, so he had the complaint in front of him We had to put an answer together. And he literally sat with us paragraph by paragraph, deny, admit, DKI, and looked at us and deny knowledge and information. So he looked at us and said, do you understand why? And so he literally taught us that way. And then we went on to also sit with him when he was on the phone with the opposing counsel or a judge came to court. And so by doing that, you learn how somebody else does it, what it's supposed to look like. You learn analytical skills, research skills. You learn to question things and think about things in a different way. And it was all those skills that I took with me when I was a young lawyer, but then when I went on to become a compliance officer, and certainly when I had to learn this entire new area of the law, a new profession, frankly, I started right back at the beginning. I got the book that I needed to get. There's a book if you are a compliance officer for a registered investment advisor. The Bible, so to speak, is something called Lemke and Lynn. They're the two authors of Registration of Investment Advisors, and it's this really thick, the book, soft cover, but like thousands of pages. And I got my hands on that book, and I read a good part of that book, and I just taught myself the same way I did when I was a young lawyer. So those skills of doing the hard work, of doing the research, of the analysis and asking the questions that you learn as a young lawyer, that's what I brought with me as a compliance officer later on.
Rhea, I'm sure you've heard the story not an anecdote, that happened over the past few months where a lawyer turned in a brief that was written by ChatGPT, was sanctioned by the court, held up to a lot of ridicule, me included. But the more I thought about it, I really thought it was actually a pretty good lesson. And I wanted to see if what your thoughts. And the lesson for me was, as a young associate, I would often be tasked with putting together a first draft of a motion or a brief or something. And I had to make sure that if I cited a case, I had read that case, and that if I cited it for a proposition, it had to be correct, because the partner either probably knew the case, and if he didn't, he would read it and make sure it was cited. And so I learned from that, even on a first draft, you have to have intellectual rigor around it. And as funny / stupid / inane as that lawyer was, what I try to tell people is, hey, ChatGPT might give you a decent first draft, but it's up to you as the lawyer to check every citation to make sure it's correct, because that's going to be your name signed at the bottom, and you're an officer of the court, and you have to represent to the court that's true and correct to the best of your ability. Was that your experience as a young lawyer in drafting or putting together at least first drafts of motions or other legal pleadings?
Yes, absolutely it was. And to talk for a second about the ChatGPT mistake, it struck me the same way I think it struck you. And the thing that really got me there is the lawyer who engaged in that, made that mistake, I guess I'll say, was a senior lawyer. That individual had been practicing law for about 35 years, if I remember correctly. So he wasn't a young associate who just didn't know any better. And that was surprising to me, because to your point, as you're saying, and I don't know, maybe I take it for granted, but that's exactly the way I practice law. I would do a first draft. I would make sure that I read every case. In New York, we have something called McKinney's, and you look up the statute or you look up the issue, and then there's these little citations that follow afterwards. And I would read the case. I wouldn't just rely on the little site. And then, Tom, there's this thing called shepherdizing, right? Is the case still good law? Of course, that's exactly what you need to do as you're practicing. And you've got to get into those good habits as a young lawyer, and then carry that through the rest of your practice, which again is why this mistake that we're talking about with the ChatGPT, it was so surprising because of his seniority.
Let me move ahead to when you moved to the CO chair. What were some of the challenges you found or you were able to overcome as a chief compliance officer, as opposed to being more of a traditional lawyer, or the things that the in-house folks did?
Yeah, look, when I started, as I said, I was at Starwood Capital, and they were a real estate related private equity fund. And it was just the time when private equity funds were now coming under the regulatory umbrella of the SEC. And so they needed to hire a compliance officer. I eventually became the chief compliance officer, but they didn't want me there. They were like, why are you here? What do we need you for? And the advantage I had in that situation that I did not have later on when I was in corporate compliance is that I had the rule book, right? I had the Investment Advisors Act, and I would point to when I say, guys, I'm here because of this. You got to comply with all of these rules. And you have to be you have to use your advocacy skills to convince them as to why you need to be there. But you're absolutely right. It was very different than I was practicing law when I was defending IBM, because you're not making an argument necessarily on paper, and you're not going to court or whatever. You're trying to uphold these rules and compliance with these rules that exist in the Advisors Act. When I was at Starwood 2 years in, we, for regulatory reasons, needed to form a broker-dealer entity. We were raising more than one fund at a time, and the rules required a broker-dealer for that, and they didn't want to go outside. We formed the broker-dealer with outside counsel, and I had to take my Series 7, my Series 63, and my Series 24 exams, which I still have current licenses, in order to do that. And so those were additional different skills that you had to have in order to be a chief compliance officer at a broker dealer. So it's different than practicing law, but the main challenge is trying to get them to understand the value that you bring, and you have to use your advocacy skills for that.
I've really never heard it phrased that way. I often hear the biggest skill or the most important skill you have as a chief compliance officer is persuasion, but you've used the word advocacy and advocating your position based upon the rules you were able to show them. Could you say a few words about, particularly at Starwood, where first-time CO or first-time compliance in a place the business guys may not have wanted you, where you didn't have the authority to bring the hammer down? How did you persuade them?
Personal relationships. You just have to create strong relationships and credibility so that when they come to you with questions or you find things out, usually that's the case, and you go to them and you have conversations with them, you've developed enough credibility with them so that the times that you really need to say, no, we absolutely can't do this, we have to do it in a completely different way, they believe you and they trust you. And so they would have social events, lots of social events, and I would make sure that I was there, right? And that I showed them the human side of me, the personal side of me, so that it created the bond and that relationship. When I got to Cushman many years later, one of the CEOs that came in while I was there, he came from Goldman Sachs. So he had that background, that financial services background. And we had a great relationship, and he took me under his wing there, and he told me again there. And it was truer there because I had more people. He goes, Maria, just sit down and have a cup of coffee with people. Have a conversation with them. Make sure that they understand that you're a person and you just want to help. You want to help. And that's what I did at Starwood without even knowing I was doing it. Honestly, I wasn't doing it on purpose, but certainly at Cushman, I was a little bit more aware of that. And then the other thing, of course, in financial services is you always have to, not always, but if you can relate what you're doing to them in terms of dollars and cents, they get that, right? Fines, lost revenue, reputational risk, like that they understand. Don't talk so much about the SEC and FINRA and all of that. Talk more about they're going to lose money, and they get that.
How important was for you at Starwood to learn that business? Because that was yet another new business for you.
It was very important. And I was fortunate there that I had created such great relationships with the business guys that they would let me sit in their meetings with our counsel, with outside counsel, with investors, so that I could soak that up. Because look, I understood the real estate piece of it, right? I understood that in the fund, they were buying and selling hotels. They were buying and selling commercial buildings. I got that. But the fund structure part of it was completely new to me. And yes, I had to make sure that I understood that, because to your point, that went to credibility, right? If I couldn't talk to them about the fund structure and as it fit in with the regulatory requirement, they weren't going to listen to me. Yeah, I had to learn it.
After Starwood, you've hinted at, and you told us you moved to non-regulated corporate world. Could you tell us the differences, really, if any, that you found between being a CEO in a regulated industry as opposed to in the non-regulated corporate world?
Yeah, absolutely. So after Starwood, I was there 4 years, and then I went to AIG Asset Management. It was more of the same. They were an RIA and a broker dealer. So it was similar. So it was about 6.5 years of my compliance experiences in the regulated world. And I got to the corporate world, the corporate compliance world. And I got to tell you, Tom, it was tough because I was looking around and I was like, where's the book? Where's the rules? Where's the rule book? Because that did make my job a little bit easier. And I was ultimately, if I really came down to it, I could point. So Section 703 of the Advisors Act requires conflict disclosure. You don't have that in the corporate world, right? I had to get a little creative. But what I did do, though, is I found the enforcement guidelines, right? The DOJ and the SEC, what their expectations were. And so that helped guide me in what I did. But it had to be a lot more creative in that world than in the regulated world. Because again, it's just there's a framework within which you can operate.
Maria, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time for this episode, but I wanted to end with, if our listeners wanted to connect with you or get contact with you, what would be the best way for them to do?
Absolutely. The best way would be LinkedIn, and I would welcome that. So thank you.
Maria, I always enjoy our visits, and I look forward to what we come up with together next.
Me too. Thanks a lot, Tom.